Welcome to the latest instalment of The Curious Capitalist. The Curious Capitalist is a series of podcasts where we take the opportunity to not only speak to board members from the Conscious Capitalism Connecticut chapter, but also local business owners, startups and entrepreneurs from across the state of Connecticut. On this edition, we have the pleasure of speaking with Lee Cruz, who is the Director of Community Outreach at the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Lee, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you so much. So thanks for joining us on today's podcast here for The Curious Capitalist. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and get to know you a little bit better. So tell me a little bit about how you got to this point in your career.
Well, it's really been a very interesting journey. I moved to New Haven, Connecticut, where I currently reside in 1983 to direct a dropout prevention program for Hispanic youth that led to a connection with a couple who was living here at the time, who introduced me to international development work. I wound up moving to León, Nicaragua in Central America for a year to help set up an organization called the New Haven León Sister City Project. I stayed for 12 years and wound up doing really interesting multidimensional international development work in health, education, community development, economic development, sustainable farming, transportation, and that wound up informing a lot of the work that I do now. Having returned to the United States at the end of the last millennium, 1998, I've been working at a number of nonprofits and now work, as you mentioned, at the Community Foundation, where I connect people, nonprofits, and businesses to create social and economic capital.
Wow, that's quite a journey to this point and this part of New Haven, that's for sure.
It has been.
So tell me, Lee, what do you wish you'd known before you started out on that career path?
I wish I spoke more languages than I speak. I only speak English and Spanish. And I actually, in retrospect, really appreciate the fact that my parents chose for me to learn Spanish. That has influenced actually my being a parent. I'm having my kids learn English, Spanish, Hebrew, and Mandarin. And kids can do that. They're amazing.
I couldn't agree more. I think languages are so important, particularly in the time and age that we find ourselves in right now. So if you could have dinner with any figure in history, who would it be and why? And what questions do you think you'd ask them?
Oh my gosh, that is, what a question.
Well, you didn't think it was going to be easy, did you?
Well, I mean, one of my personal heroes is, straight out of nowhere having to do with my work or directly my life is Carl Sagan, the astronomer. So I would love to talk to him about the universe in general. I would love to speak also with John F. Kennedy. He strikes me as a very, very interesting figure with a very interesting life. And just to round things off, I would say probably a very interesting person to meet would be a Black woman from the turn of the last century, Sojourner Truth. And Sojourner was an interesting person because she was trying to figure out how to work with the women's movement at the turn of the last century as a Black woman.
That sounds like it would be a fascinating dinner party. I'd like to come to that one. So tell me, Lee, what has been your greatest personal fear that you have had to face in your life?
Thinking back to my dad and the way that he brought us up, I would say probably not living up to being responsible enough. Growing up, 5 boys followed by a girl.
Wow.
One of the things that, we were taught very strongly and very clearly is to be responsible, to act responsibly. And this responsibility was not just for our behavior in terms of our siblings and being an example, but being an example in our society and in the work and in representing our household outside in the community. And then the other thing my dad was really big on is honor. So I would say not being honorable enough, not being responsible enough in the work that I do and in the way that I live my life.
Absolutely. It's like, look at my actions, not what I say sometimes. So it's a high bar you're setting yourself, but a very noble one.
Thank you.
So tell me, how did you first get involved in conscious capitalism here in Connecticut?
Well, I first actually heard about it through Larry Bingham, the recent past president. And he's actually the first one that introduced me to the name and to the concept. I then, at a later point, became friends with Glenn McDermott, who is now the executive director, and then over time came to realize that he was not only a member, but then now has become the executive director. And then as time has gone on, I have just stumbled across in conversation friends who are business owners. I am not a business owner. And I come to find out that they're involved or that their work aligns with the principles. In some cases, it's been a discovery that they're a member. In others, it's actually introducing them because it seems very much to be aligned with the approach they have to their business and their business dealings.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we've discovered in doing this series of podcasts has been that a number of local businesses are already practicing many of the principles of conscious capitalism, and they didn't really have a name for it. And then they stumbled across or heard through business friends what conscious capitalism was and how it was active here in Connecticut, and then decided to get involved. So it's kind of nice how it's organically growing in that way.
Yes, it is.
So thinking about culture and leadership, and without sort of defaulting to generic core values, what language would you use to describe your organization and its culture?
So when you ask about my organization, I sort of have to think about two different hats. So there's the place where I work, from where I derive my income, which is the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. And the best way to describe that organization is we're the largest philanthropic entity in Greater New Haven, with assets of over $642 million. The core of that money has been donated to us by very generous individuals and families since our founding in 1928. And our business is to invest that money, to then take the return on the investment and on those investments and grant it out to local area nonprofits in New Haven and 19 surrounding towns.
That's brilliant. So you mentioned that's your one hat, your first hat, if you like. What about the second hat?
So the second hat is one of the co-founders of the Chatham Square Neighborhood Association. We're currently a group of about 500 residents and or business owners, because some of the residents are in fact the business owners of some of the businesses in our community. And what we're doing is we're trying to build and sustain a community in one of New Haven's 6 poorest neighborhoods, Fairhaven, poorest in terms of economic demographics. Not so poor in spirit of community. And this work is a work that I do as a volunteer, and it has evolved into a collaboration between those of us who live here and those of us who do business here.
So how did you start doing this work, or what was the genesis of this work? What was kind of at its core, I guess?
Well, I've always been interested in this relationship, going back to the work, the international development work of sustaining people, not just simply by providing charitable benefit, but by helping them to sustain themselves. And so I brought that sort of thinking back to the work here. And when I was hired at the Community Foundation to work with people in neighborhoods to try to stabilize neighborhoods like Fairhaven through home ownership, what occurred to me was that the best way to really stabilize a neighborhood is not just by increasing home ownership, but by building and fortifying the relationship between the local businesses and the residents. The shape that takes is we have a main street where there are a number of restaurants. For several years now, we have been doing a thing called community dining out night. And what we'll do is we'll pick one of our local restaurants. We will obviously let the owner know. And on one of the traditionally slow nights, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday evening, we try to get as many residents as possible to go. There's no meeting, there's no agenda. We are there to eat and to eat together.
Sounds like my idea of a great meeting, Lee. So with the current situation, obviously with coronavirus and many restaurants struggling, how are you involved supporting those restaurants now?
So interesting. We had a conversation, several of us in the community, about how community dining out night would not be able to continue since there's obviously no social gatherings. So after our conversation, I went out and tested with some of the owners, and we've evolved community dining out night into community dining in week.
Brilliant.
So the difference is that now what we're doing is going through our restaurants that we work with, a half dozen restaurants in our neighborhood, and we pick one per week, and we try to send as many of our local area residents, and they go to that restaurant. This past week, it was a Mexican restaurant in our neighborhood. This generates several $100s worth of business for restaurants that at the current time, they don't have waiters and waitresses working. Everybody who's working at the restaurant is cooking, delivering, et cetera, et cetera. So what we've agreed with the owners of the restaurants is they will charge their normal price. We will eat to our heart's content. And all of the residents working with our neighborhood association are tipping. And the tip, 100% of the tip goes into a fund, and that fund is used to purchase gift cards from our local supermarket, also right in our neighborhood. Those gift cards are given to our local community health center. It's a federally qualified community health center, so it serves the poorest people in our neighborhood. And when patients come in through telemedicine these days, the doctor or the nurse is able to then give that family a gift card or two, $10, $20, $30, $40 worth of gift card so that they can go out and make purchases at our local supermarket.
What a great idea. What a fantastic idea to help people at a really difficult time. Superb work. Love it. Thinking about the culture in your organization, if you could snap your fingers and make one cultural change within your organization, what would it be and why?
Wonderful. The hardest one is getting people to understand how the entire circle of community works. People come, myself included, come in and out of an understanding and sometimes get lost in the circle. We are doing everything we do to build and sustain community in our neighborhood. In order to generate those activities and create that sense of community, we need money. The best way to make money is not to have somebody give it to you, although some people would disagree with that. The best way to make money is to do it in such a way that there are all sorts of benefits from the generation of that income. And that is in fact what makes it sustainable, is that there's a bunch of winners. We're looking constantly for ways in which we can assist those people who have the means to be able to do what they do, whether it's creating art or creating food or selling houses or providing housing. We're looking for ways in which we can help them to be more successful in that venture. I don't know if I would call it a change, but it's the constant reminder to not get stuck in one of those, like, how do we generate more income? Or how do we generate more socially beneficial programs? It's the circle, and reminding ourselves to not lose sight of the forest for any one individual tree. All of the trees make the forest. All of the things that we do build and sustain community, which is the main focus of the neighborhood association.
When you're not focused on your work, what do you do to relax, Lee?
So I like to walk around my neighborhood and just see my neighbors and talk to the business owners. I find that very relaxing. Do that by myself. I do it with my family. Biking is another form of relaxation. And since I have two kids, 5 and 9, they consume a lot of my time, and I love it when they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, because that's an opportunity to go out together and try to figure it out.
I bet they keep you on your toes, that's for sure.
Yes,
So
they do.
when you're not working, being a dad, do you watch television? Do you chill out with a bit of Netflix?
We have no broadcast or cable television in our house. We have Netflix and the like, and then we selectively watch Curiosity Stream, which is a wonderful science-based type Netflix, very focused on science and nature. My kids have very inquisitive minds, and so staying up to date with them on terms of what the latest science is. I have one son, Pablo. He wants to be an astrobiologist, and his brother Mateo, who's 5, he wants to be at mission control for for that. So they'll be quite the pair.
So Lee, to finish up then, tell me, where do you go from here? What's next? What's your 5-10 year plan? What is going to be next for Lee Cruz?
Well, in terms of the work in the neighborhood, in the community, I'm really interested in a couple of different ideas that I've heard ruminating in other parts of the country. I've had a couple of conversations with a gentleman who works in the Boston area. There's an organization called Ujima, Ujima, I believe it's spelled Ujima Boston. And I think it's a great idea. I'd like to implement it in our neighborhood. And this is basically community organizing meets community investing. So as I understand it, Ujima has aggregated a number of people in these neighborhoods and had conversations about the relationship between the people that live in the neighborhood and the people who do business, the recurring theme. And what they've been able to do is aggregate investment from these families, relatively tiny investments in the hundreds of dollars or less than hundreds of dollars from individual people and families. They get those matched in multiples by larger organizations from outside of the neighborhood. And then that money is lent to local businesses in the community. And what they're looking for in these businesses is not a great credit rating. They're looking for a business that the community identifies as one that they would like to keep in the neighborhood, a business that shows a business plan for how they would use that investment, basically that loan. And the money is lent out to these businesses. And I'll tell you, nothing motivates you to use one of your local businesses more than knowing that you're an investor in that neighborhood. And as that business goes, so goes your income from that investment.
Absolutely. A real invested interest, literally.
Yeah. It's my understanding that the less you invest, in other words, the lower income people who live in the neighborhood get the highest return. And the larger investors who are from outside, who basically are using this as a way of, promoting social good, they get the lower return. And so I'm really interested in this model and in seeing if we might be able to implement it here in Fairhaven. And then the second organization I've heard of, and actually went to one of their workshops, is an organization out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, Incremental Development. Their website is incrementaldevelopment.org. Very simple. And what they're doing is training and helping local people who might normally be contracted by a developer. That would be skilled craftsmen, it would be architects, realtors, helping them to aggregate themselves and to understand exactly what a developer does, which is basically to build a team of people and to tell a story to an investor that gets the investor to put money into a project with which the property is secured and the architect is paid, realtor, builders, etc. As a result, a building is developed. So imagine if the developer were the very people who have most investment in that neighborhood, the skilled craftsman, the realtor, the architect from that neighborhood or from that city. This is what incremental development has been doing now for a number of years, teaching people around the country how to do this. So again, we are in the process after a workshop of identifying people in our neighborhood who we could support. This would fit in very nicely with the strategy of inclusive growth as we find Black, Latino, and women owners of businesses in New Haven's lower income neighborhoods to begin to make investments in some of the housing stock and commercial stock that are too small and not in the right places, in quotes, for other developers. So those are two ideas that I know are working elsewhere, or they appear to be working, and I'd be interested in seeing how we can bring those things to my neighborhood and to my city. And then taking that hat off and putting on my work hat, what I'm doing in my neighborhood serves not only to make my neighborhood better, but as a part of my work at the Community Foundation, I administer a program called the Neighborhood Leadership Program, and we identify 12 to 20 people from around New Haven and surrounding towns, East Haven, West Haven, and Hamden. We identify them and support them in their leadership, in their community. What I'm doing is not only improving my neighborhood, but it helps inform what might be possible in other neighborhoods. That's also an evolving process. That's the future, at least for the next 5 years or so.
It sounds like you have got a very busy 5 years ahead of you, that's for sure, and some great projects that, hopefully you'll be able to pick up and transplant in our local community. So Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about what you get up to. Would you like to share the web addresses for the various organizations that you're a part of at the moment?
Sure. So if people are interested in the work of the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, is CFGNH for Community Foundation Greater New Haven, CFGNH.org. The Chatham Square Neighborhood Association, because there are so many Chatham Squares around the country, you got to kind of get it right. So it's chathamsquare.ning.com, or you can search Chatham Square Neighborhood Association, New Haven, Connecticut. And that should bring us up as well on Google.
That's fantastic. Lee, thank you once again. Thank you so much for your time today. To find out more information about conscious capitalism here in Connecticut, you can also check out the website, which is connecticut.consciouscapitalism.org. Lee, until next time, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the latest installment of The Curious Capitalist. For more information, you can visit the website connecticut.consciouscapitalism.org.